Hello there. They call me the rip-off artist, and today I'm gonna go through Belated Media's rewrite of Attack of the Clones, where he thinks he'd be so much better at writing a sequel. Thankfully this time, it isn't a bunch of dumb revisions. This is a flat-out rewrite this time. Unfortunately, the rewrite dissolves into absurdity, with him making a lot of questionable changes. Another thing I thought about this time around was what the hell happens to the continuity of the expanded universe in this timeline deviation. For example, what's Jorah's Sabaoth or Thrawn doing? When did the Outbound Flight project happen? How does this rewrite tie into what's already been written? Belated Media doesn't talk much about the franchise at this rate. How we got a swarm of content to keep Star Wars alive? I can't really think of any outright retcons to the EU in this version off the top of my head, but with that tangent aside, let's rip in.
What if episode 2 were good? Like, really good?
By your standards, it would have flopped, been panned across the board, and George takes the blame regardless, even if it was your changes. In this hypothetical, you really did George dirty last time, and you're about to smear the mud on him again.
What if we return to the same hypothetical universe where I was a story exec over at Fox when the prequel trilogies were being developed, and as such, I was able to correct some of the film's missteps?
Yeah, George would have ignored your advice going into Attack of the Clones, because the Phantom Menace bombed because of you. It would probably be the last time he dared listen to a story executive of any kind.
And what if the changes that I made in episode 1 now rippled into episodes 2 and 3?
Then I would sweat like a motherfucker. Your sequel prequels are gonna be horrible.
Well, allow me to cast one more stone into that prequel pond real fast. Everybody, take out your scripts, cross out Naboo, and relabel it Alderaan.
Damn, a last minute rewrite. Are you sure you're qualified for this?
Now, the reason for this is simple. If you're going to be blowing up a planet in the later films, we should be seeing it a couple of times so we actually care about it.
I suppose it's not a bad change, although from what I recall, Alderaan is a core world, while Naboo was all the way out in the mid-rim. Thus, it was more vulnerable to the blockade, but in your rewrite, they somehow had the Trade Federation screw over Naboo for weeks without the Senate or the Jedi knowing about it.
And now that that little bit of housekeeping's out of the way, let's look at the structure of our actual house.
By the time we get to the end, you won't have a house to furnish because it'll be burnt to the ground.
Guys, in case you didn't know, episode 2's a bit of a mess. Looks like I can't just make a few minor changes. With episode 2, things have to be a bit more drastic.
Look who's talking.
With all that in mind, let's dive into this what if.
What if? What if I take your rewrite script, rip it up, and tell you to start over?
Now, just like episode 1, episode 2 suffers from focus being in the wrong place.
Yeah, focusing on Padme's tits is just too misogynistic. Let's go with a gay bromance instead between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Believe me when I say that would fucking suck.
For some reason, the film spends almost half its time on this weird forbidden love.
Yeah, I think you need to take a look at this promo and tell me, with a straight face, that the romance doesn't matter.
When the real relationship being focused on should be that of Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Oh yes, we've been here before. Anakin and Obi-Wan should have more screen time. I think the screen time we get in the films are enough because it demonstrates the extremely strained friendship between the two. As a result of Qui-Gon's death, which, speaking of, Qui-Gon's death in your version doesn't matter as much. The reason I prefer George's version is because Qui-Gon's death has a stronger ripple that comes off in Anakin and Obi-Wan. Come to think of it, I remember when I was a kid watching these movies, I felt Qui-Gon had far too short of a presence and I craved more of him. Which is a good thing because that meant that the character stuck with me even after his story was over. As cheesy as it sounds, there was something magical about the Star Wars movies that resonated with me and got me so invested. Now there's something Belated Media talks about next that I want to address.
If you don't show them being friends, then it doesn't really matter when they become enemies. Like in George's version, we literally get one scene of them in the elevator where they're like, we're friends. And then moments later, Anakin's a dick to Obi-Wan, and then they like branch off and do their own separate thing for like the entire movie and then are rejoined and are snarky to one another in the Coliseum, and that's the film.
Yeah, here's the thing. thing. Most prequel haters have such an idealized version of Anakin and Obi-Wan's friendship that they are so goddamn oblivious to the big elephant in the room. That being that their friendship was nothing like you think. Keep in mind they like to cite Obi-Wan describing it in A New Hope without remembering that this is dialogue in relation to disguising and misleading the audience on the fate of Anakin Skywalker. I think people make the mistake of thinking that everything, except how Anakin was dead, was completely accurate and truthful, which the following movie dispelled, and the whole thing when those two were the only Star Wars movies was the anticipation of Obi-Wan giving Luke the real story. Even then in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan sidesteps his deception by using the whole certain point of view excuse, so how Obi-Wan describes everything is to be taken with a grain of salt. So really George was presenting to us the reality of Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, rather than the descriptions not matching up from an unreliable source. Keep that in mind as we go along.
It's not enough to simply tell us that they're friends. We should be seeing it in their actions. And friends stick together.
Okay, first, friends are not gay lovers. They can argue frequently, especially in this stressful context. And secondly, splitting off was not by choice. They were obligated to by the Jedi Council. Anakin was tasked with protecting Padme, and Obi-Wan was tasked with finding the assassin. Also, in case you didn't pick up, this was all manipulated by Palpatine, as he organized the attempted assassinations in the first place.
But yes, the plot. Let's get into that.
Oh boy.
Now, for the most part, the crawl of Attack of the Clones is pretty good. Unrest in the Senate, there are separatists, the Republic needs an army.
Well, I'll give you that. That's a point above Cosmotard Variety Hour, that you realize the effectiveness of the title crawl of the movie.
So let's address that needs an army thing first. We don't need any of these weird backdoor dealings to get us to the clone troopers. Like, it's impressive that Palpatine and Dooku set up this incredibly elaborate game of mousetrap to get us to those clones, but why not just start with Palpatine talking to the Jedi Council?
Yeah, Obi-Wan not discovering the clone army and instead just rolling them in at the very start sounds far less interesting. I also hate this change because you really did not catch on to what George was doing. For one, it's part of how the Sith orchestrated the war in the first place, since Obi-Wan discovers the droid factory right after Oso, and it's a hint that the Sith were controlling both sides. But not enough to put all the pieces together. But there is something suspicious about all this. However, the Clone Wars started the very next day. This is the thing that I have against videos like this that I've seen online. The Clone Wars were meant to serve as a distraction to the Jedi. The Separatist crisis was meant to be a more important task at hand. And there's no direct indication that the Sith are involved, at least not until the Clone Wars 2008 ruined it. Also, the allegory of the clones being the direct predecessor to the stormtroopers is also lost, by having this rewrite not prominently feature the clones very much. Why is it even still called Attack of the Clones? There's a lot of symbolism that the clones serve, how it foreshadows the Empire with lines about how they are totally obedient and designed to follow orders without question. So point is, not making the clones a central part of the story in a movie called Attack of the Clones is absolutely stupid. This guy's version of episode 2 in general sounds like an insufferably boring movie, with a weak story and not enough spectacle to make up for it. Hell, I would argue that Bay Formers is stronger than this crap.
And remember, Palpatine in my version is now in charge of defense.
Yeah, and it was absolutely a pointless change, just like aging up Anakin.
So Palpatine's telling the Jedi, hey, you're outnumbered, so the Senate's commissioned that a clone army be formed. Naturally, the Jedi are opposed to this, but Palpatine's like, guys, I totally get where you're coming from, but everyone's really freaked out right now by these separatists, and you guys are kind of outnumbered, so we need this army to show that the Republic's still strong.
Also, is it just me, or are we still going to get the criticism that we don't know what's starting this crisis? You also have to wonder what Newt Gunray's doing in this version. He isn't mentioned at all. Guess he just forgot about him.
However, at this point, we have the ideological counter to Palpatine in the form of Yoda.
So you omitted Yoda from The Phantom Menace, but now you're backtracking and including him because you realize that he has to be there for the story to flow effectively. Jesus, I would be scared to think what we were in for if George actually listened to you.
Yoda remarks that meeting might with might doesn't necessarily show strength.
Also, I noticed that Yoda, at least from what Belated Media is describing, doesn't even have his quirkiness from The Empire Strikes Back, which OT purists think are a fundamental part of his character, when really it was an act to deceive Luke. and he was actually wise and mature. Why Belated Media didn't catch on to this, I don't know. But maybe he likes the prequels a bit more than he's letting on.
However, Palpatine's like, yeah, hey, that's super cool and everything, but the Senate's already passed it, so there's like definitely an army. Have fun with that.
Gee, there being no conflict or opposition to the bill seems really contrived. Especially in this version, Palpatine is openly pro-war, as opposed to pretending to be anti-war in the prequels, but forced into the crisis. I don't understand how he's not trying to fool everyone by presenting himself as relatably frustrated at the war. Palpatine relying on military victories to gain popularity is far less effective, I think, even if he's controlling this war. Also, a question. If Palpatine isn't the Chancellor, then how does he ensure the Republic side of the war goes exactly to plan? And on top of that, how does he control the Separatist side exactly, if he's not in charge of their leader either? Seriously, Belated Media missed what George was doing. Palpatine still needs to obey the Chancellor after all. Also, I have to wonder, what the hell is Palpatine's backstory in this? If you're replacing Naboo with Alderaan, where is he from? Darn, the Darth Plagueis novel as it exists would never happen in this version.
But even with this clone army, the Jedi aren't to be bested yet. Yoda makes mention that the House of Alderaan has reached out to both senators and separatists, in hopes of tabling this in a diplomatic manner.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the Trade Federation is completely phased out of the story. So the Phantom Menace seems completely pointless in this rewrite. Yeah, I keep thinking about how he overlooked Qui-Gon in Episode 1, and Anakin's fate doesn't seem all that important given in this guy's version, Palpatine was looking for Obi-Wan to be his next apprentice. And by making Anakin and Obi-Wan far more friendly with each other, it kinda just makes Qui-Gon a pointless addition. I mean, really. Qui-Gon, instead of being his own character, is just the foil of Obi-Wan in Belated Media's version. And that is complete rubbish.
And from there, we transition to a hangar where we join up with Obi-Wan, Anakin, and several other Jedi escorting senators to their ship. Anakin's expressing concern that he might not be ready for such an important mission.
I also want to know who you're casting as Anakin in this version, since I don't see that design looking like Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, he's passed all his basic training, but he doesn't feel quite up to snuff, especially whenever handling a lightsaber. But Obi-Wan, who's now warmed up to Anakin at this point...
Yeah, this is another roadblock in the story. Since Anakin is a young adult in this version, Obi-Wan doesn't need to deal with a rebellious teenager. And it takes away from the conflicted friendship. And from what I remember, since he doesn't give the arc to Anakin, and instead Obi-Wan, it makes Anakin's turn to the dark side far less effective. Because if you're going to have a story in Star Wars featuring the descent towards the dark side beginning to end, you best show the character develop into that. It was done with Ulic Qel-Droma, Quinlan Vos, and even Palpatine in the Darth Plagueis novel, by showing that he was always psychopathic, and that he was born to be a Sith even before he was a Sith.
It smiles, countering that a lightsaber isn't what makes a Jedi great. I mean, look to Master Yoda. He's one of the greatest Jedi of all times, and he never uses a lightsaber. And he won't because it completely clashes with everything that his character stands for.
Wrong. That's a thing that prequel haters completely made up about Yoda. And it's incredibly stupid, because the lightsaber is the Jedi's signature weapon. So why would the Grand Master not have a lightsaber? I think people just saw Yoda in Empire without a lightsaber and thought it was a fundamental part of his character, when no, he lost his lightsaber in Revenge of the Sith, and he didn't have a spare.
The conversation should feel very brotherly.
I remember having fights with my brothers too, you know. I have two younger brothers, both twins who have completely different genes from each other. And my youngest brother was always an annoying chatterbox when he was younger, and my middle brother was an aggressive wrestling freak. They also have to rely on me for their Star Wars knowledge, and they ignored me when I specifically told them to watch Star Wars in chronological order with their friend who had never seen Star Wars, not in release order. And I gave them the exact reasons why. That tangent aside, I had fights with my brothers too. That is also what I'd call brotherly by nature.
However, this pep talk is cut a bit short when a pilot shouts from down the hangar, "Oh my gosh, you're Anakin Skywalker! I saw your pod race. It was absolutely inspirational and it made me want to become a pilot. are you escorting the ship? And Anakin's like, yeah, actually, I am.
So as Belated Media is about to reveal, this is his take on Owen Lars, and making him an Anakin Skywalker fanboy, it's almost like a projection of all the Vader boys who idolize Vader as a badass warlord, when the reality was far from that. On that, I'd like to talk about how you're not supposed to root for the villains, and that people are so enamored with the evil is cool trope that they can't distinguish that from morality in a story. People constantly forget the underlying message of Scarface, for example, and are so caught up quoting Al Pacino without realizing that the story is against the criminal lifestyle. And Tony Montana's arc demonstrates that. This sort of shit too is why I'm so against the Acolyte, because Butthead paints the Jedi in a bad light, basically saying those who sacrifice everything, including themselves, are not to be admired, and we should instead sympathize with Quamir in spite of what he's done. So most of the time, most prequel haters were taught the wrong thing from watching Star Wars, and it's why I don't respect their opinion whatsoever, because it's a failure to understand the movies, instead basing their misguided narratives about how George Lucas didn't care, or he was surrounded by yes men to justify it. Anyways, enough with that, let's move on.
And the pilot keeps fanboying out. He's like, oh my gosh, I could not believe that in my wildest dreams I'd be flying alongside Anakin Skywalker. The name's Owen Lars.
You bet I hated that introduction too. Making Owen Lars an annoying pest who Anakin doesn't want to be around.
Like I said before, I'm shaking things up a bit. But you know, the term uncle doesn't need to be familial. And in Owen and Anakin becoming closer, it makes sense as to why he would be taking care of Luke.
Okay, before we move on, I don't think making Owen Lars more involved is a bad change whatsoever. It can assist the story in regards to Anakin and Obi-Wan's characters, but the way Belated Media introduces and depicts him is so terrible. He's nothing but an overly energetic fan of Anakin Skywalker, which I imagine is just meant to symbolize how Anakin Skywalker is a heroic badass who gets all the bitches. Anakin is not a role model whatsoever, and people should not be looking up to him, especially his second half Darth Vader.
And really, when you look at George's version, Owen's exposure to Anakin is super weird. Just think about this for a second. You're hanging out on your moisture farm when suddenly some dude who you've never met shows up and says that he's the son of the slave that your father bought and married.
I'm sure Owen would have heard stories about his stepbrother from Shmi, so him showing up isn't that random. Also, there's C-3PO too. Speaking of which, Belated Media pokes fun at the supposed plot hole of Owen not remembering C-3PO and vice versa. Except C-3PO had a memory wipe, and on top of that, when Owen sees him again in A New Hope, he's got a different color scheme and doesn't directly ask him for his designation. He just needed a droid who spoke bocce. So yeah, as weird as it seems at first glance, with the new context given by the prequel trilogy, there's actually a plausibility behind it.
And when he finds out that she's been kidnapped, he takes off.
Yeah, not right away. There's a scene before he leaves, you know.
Leaving you to engage in awkward conversation with this overly dressed woman he showed up with, while he mindlessly goes apeshit on a ton of sand people.
Going apeshit on sand people, not relevant. Owen didn't see that, and he only admits what he's done to Padme.
Then comes back with the body, grieves briefly at the funeral.
Damn, what a sin to grieve for your mother. I guess Belated Media thinks that contrary to what we were shown in The Phantom Menace, Shmi was a total stereotypical bitch of a stepmother to Owen.
Then leaves, and then years later, another dude who you've never met shows up with the murderer's son. Would you really take that child in?
I don't see how they have a choice. I'm sure Obi-Wan explained everything to them, and Belated Media, let me ask you a question. Would you just tell Obi-Wan to fuck off when he gives you an infant boy and explains you're the only family he has left? Yeah, I didn't think so. This is such a stupid complaint. This is like asking why the Dursleys kept Harry Potter when Dumbledore left him at their doorstep. Like, what else were they gonna do? And this is considering the fact that they made him a house servant and treated him like shit, unlike Owen and Beru. So in short, they didn't have a choice. And imagine being that guy who refused to take care of your stepbrother's son, even after Obi-Wan explains everything. How you react to this responsibility as a guardian is another story.
Anyway, off to Alderaan they go when ambush, enemy separatist fighters.
Thank God for some action. this was a pretty lame and nonsensical movie so far.
So here we are with our first real dogfight, and this allows for a number of things to happen. Thing one, we get to see that Anakin's a very good pilot, like Obi-Wan told Luke.
Even if it wasn't depicted, it doesn't change anything because Obi-Wan is an extremely unreliable source anyways.
And thing two, we get to see that they're very close friends who have one another's backs, and there's a fun bit of cross-cutting banter.
So the Coruscant speeder chase wasn't enough? Oh no, it was because they also argued during that too, and you wanted them to be gay lovers.
Not just between Obi-Wan and Anakin, but also including Owen, who, despite being paired with a clunky civilian ship, is really managing to hold his own in the fray.
Also, quick question. How the hell are they doing this outside Coruscant? Doesn't Coruscant have busy traffic coming in and out of hyperspace? Being the galactic capital and all? Maybe somewhere more isolated and ambush would make more sense. Or maybe I'm just nitpicking. Maybe Sidious intentionally redirected all traffic to be elsewhere, allowing for the fighters to attack the convoy. But then again, Palps ain't the Chancellor in this version.
You know, we should just be having a fun space battle.
Too bad it's one of the only bits of spectacle in this entire movie.
So they arrive on Alderaan where they're greeted by Padme and another relationship change, her brother, Bail Organa.
Padme and Bail Organa are siblings in this version? Given what this guy has in store for episode 3, this change doesn't work whatsoever.
Padme is still very much loyal to the Republic, where her brother is somewhat of a Separatist sympathizer. However, when he hears of the ambush, Bail laments how fractured the Separatists are. You know, just set up his disappointment with leadership a little bit, because then he's going to later be instrumental in the formation of the Rebel Alliance. You know, just give him a bit of an arc in the prequels.
Yeah, I think I prefer the version of Bail Organa, who was a close friend of the Jedi, and believed in democracy through and through. Thus why he saw through Palpatine's charade, and became dedicated with overthrowing him, as he saw him for what he was, a tyrant. I don't know. That's more powerful for a supporting character than just, I'm disillusioned with the Republic because I'm a Separatist sympathizer, and not because I believe in freedom and democracy.
Anyway, the Separatists don't arrive until the next day, so there's a scheduled banquet for the Senators and Jedi, and so Obi-Wan finds himself in the exact place he doesn't want to be. While he's been doing everything to reinforce Anakin, he himself has been feeling a lot of doubt. He's returned to the planet where his master was killed, and he holds himself accountable for Qui-Gon's death, as he did choose to rush to the aid of Padme and not his master.
Thanks for reminding us, buddy. Obi-Wan is such a simp in this version. Especially since he and Padme don't even end up together in this version. I still hate how Qui-Gon was never made his own character in Belated Media's story.
And of course now he finds himself at a banquet sitting opposite Padme.
Also, what the hell was the point of there being a romance subplot with Obi-Wan and Padme if it's immediately dropped in the next movie? And the only emphasis placed on it is Qui-Gon's death. It sounds like Belated Media just wanted to ship the two briefly, without making it essential to the plot.
Making things only more uncomfortable for him. Anakin, on the other hand, is having an absolutely fantastic time. And now we get to see the flip side of Obi-Wan and Anakin's friendship, as Obi-Wan gets up rather abruptly to leave the conference hall, and Anakin follows, being a concerned friend. While Obi-Wan fully doesn't explain the situation to Anakin.
Yeah, thinking with your dick first 10 years ago, or however many years ago it was in this version, isn't something I'd want to talk about either.
Anakin tries his best to make Obi-Wan feel better. Obi-Wan brushing it off and choosing that he'll just go back to their barracks and meditate.
Yeah, Obi-Wan, think about how the power of love fucked up Qui-Gon. Especially since you didn't even hook up with Padme anyways. And then went to jail for, yeah, I'm not gonna say the word. It starts with a P though.
At this point, Anakin's joined outside by Owen, and the two Tatooine boys get a chance to bond as they discuss their differing backgrounds and aspirations.
Also, you know prequel haters are still going to complain about why Owen brought Luke to Tatooine if that's where Anakin grew up. And in context, it doesn't make as much sense as George's version, since you can never quickly surmise that Darth Vader never wanted to go back to Tatooine, it being symbolically painful for him. But in this version, we haven't seen that much that he resents about Tatooine. And remember that Belated Media omitted his mother from this version, and him being a former slave doesn't play as big of a role in his outlook as it should. Belated Media only brings up the slave thing as a plot point only once. And that's in his Revenge of the Sith rewrite.
And as they make their way back to the banquet hall, they encounter Padme, who doesn't want to be stuck in a room talking politics the entire time.
Yeah, also missing the point of Padme's character, someone who is stuck in politics and taken out of her shell once she meets Anakin again.
Because honestly, who'd want a bunch of politics in Star Wars?
Yeah, screw politics. Politics boring, get to the space battles.
and she offers to give them a tour of the palace grounds. Meanwhile, while this fun little tour is going on, Obi-Wan is still overrun with grief. Despite his attempt to clear his mind through meditation, flashes of Qui-Gon's death and Maul's face keep appearing in his mind.
Also, another question. Obi-Wan seems to be only bothered by Qui-Gon and Maul when he's directly reminded of them back on Alderaan. It doesn't seem like he's that bothered by it. Now, Belated Media goes with the plot point that Maul was cut in half, thus Obi-Wan thought he was dead, but in this version, it doesn't seem like Obi-Wan is traumatized by his master's death that much. Thinking back to Anakin's arc in the prequels though, he was consumed by what he had lost, and it guided his future decisions in big ways.
And then if we want to hold on with the whole premonition thing that George introduced in 2 and 3, we can add an additional flash. The image of a face engulfed in flame, however, it's too difficult for Obi-Wan to make out who it is. He's not sure if it's friend or foe. However, we don't have much time to think on this because rise and shine, the Separatists are here.
Don't the Separatists show up the next day though? Why are we cutting straight to this part?
So Jedi are positioned both inside and out of the conference hall, and proceedings are underway, but immediately get off to a bad start when Dooku asks to talk with the Jedi, not the senators.
And here comes the part where the leader of the Separatists, instead of getting the big secret that's later revealed out, wastes his time arguing with the Republic senators. I have to ask too, why the hell is Dooku not a bad guy in this version? It doesn't really make sense going into the next movie, because if Palpatine doesn't control the other half of the Clone Wars, his plan's not going to work so well. This only gets even more confusing with the introduction of General Grievous and Darth Maul working with the Separatists.
Meanwhile, Anakin and Obi-Wan are guarding the outside perimeter, and despite every attempt that Obi-Wan is making, Anakin just can't get over how wonderful of a night he had, and unknowingly rubbing salt in the wound by talking about how amazing Padme is.
Yeah, we get it. Padme and Anakin will be a thing, but Belated Media wants to treat it like a reveal for later in his version.
Now cut to the hangar where an unidentified ship is touching down, and the folks in the control tower are like, alright, we don't know who you are, could you please identify yourself?
I also think it's crazy that Maul wasn't being discreet in this version. You'd think sneaking in would be a better strategy.
And the ship is silent. Cut back to the conference room where the senators are like, yeah, no, the Jedi don't actually govern, so if you have anything to say, you should be talking to us.
I swear this is just this guy's excuse to do a dramatic reveal. And it doesn't work in the story given Dooku's not a Sith Lord. Also, Belated Media mentions that Dooku was Qui-Gon's master, but he doesn't do anything with that.
The Jedi are just here for protection. And then one of the Separatists, and just for sake of specificity, let's say it's one from the Techno Union, because guys, in George's version, there's a Techno Union.
What's the joke supposed to be here?
Is like, what do you mean you need protection? We're the ones who should be afraid of you. You've been attacking us. And then the conference hall just erupts into rabble and finger pointing.
You know, I have to wonder, wouldn't luring the Chancellor to this meeting also be a better plan with what Belated Media is doing with this rewrite? I don't know. But since Sidious doesn't fully control both sides of the war in this version, you'd think Belated Media would get Sidious to cause chaos by eliminating the leadership of both sides, and then seizing the opportunity of the power vacuum he created. That actually sounds like a good plan. But Belated Media leaves it half-baked in this rewrite.
Cut back to Anakin and Obi-Wan, Anakin saying something like, and she's really nice too.
Yeah, we get it, buddy. Anakin likes Padme. This will not be a shocking reveal later on whatsoever.
Back to the hangar. Please identify yourself. Again, silence.
I still don't like how Maul didn't sneak in. All this exists for is to build up phony tension.
Back to the conference hall where Padme is reeling. What do you mean that Separatists have been assassinated? We haven't done anything of that. You've been the one who have been assassinating our senators.
Gee, and we're only hearing about this now?
Back to the hangar. Please identify yourself. What do you mean you can't claim responsibility for these attacks?
Man, so far, this sounds like a really boring film that makes no sense whatsoever.
Anakin, can you please just please identify? And suddenly the silent ship blasts the control tower.
I knew it. Maul's going in guns blazing, and he's given the senators and separatists a chance to be aware of him before he gets to them.
And then everyone realizes that maybe there's a third party involved, and now you've got a bunch of very important people all in one room. As the ship door lowers and Darth Maul steps out. And remember, in my version, Maul was cut in half, but he didn't die, and now he's back with some pretty dope and deadly robot legs.
Available for only $19.99 each.
And a legion of battle droids.
Oh yeah, about that. If Maul's using separatist battle droids to attack both the Republic and Separatist leadership, then how does that never raise suspicion? Yeah, this is why Maul cannot be associated with the Separatists whatsoever if you're going to bring him back. And that's something even George Lucas understood in TCW. So as much as I hate Darth Maul returning in the Clone Wars, at least George thought a little bit about how to use him in that show.
He ignites his lightsaber, and it's time to get to work.
I hope those legs were done practically, otherwise you'll have people whine about CGI.
Now the conference hall is an absolute shit show. Everybody is panicking.
I also have to ask, where are the bodyguards for both the Senators and Separatists? And why aren't they also in the room with them?
Dooku dives out of the conference hall as the blast doors close. Obi-Wan and Anakin are rushing to the conference hall and they see Dooku, and Obi-Wan continues after him as Anakin makes his way to the hall.
I have to say, for such an important building, it has quite minimal security. Anakin and Obi-Wan are the only guards depicted in this version. No mention of anyone else.
As Dooku takes off, Obi-Wan throws a tracker onto it and he makes his way back to the Senators and Anakin.
Yeah, a poorly set up Chekhov's gun for later.
However, Anakin hasn't been able to get into the conference hall because the blast doors are closed.
Try using your lightsaber, dickhead.
So he's been running around looking for an entrance, and that's when he runs into Darth Maul and all of the droids.
See? Darth Maul's got the right idea.
Anakin's not eager to fight, but he is noble, so he ignites his lightsaber and goes at Maul. However, Maul knows that Anakin's small potatoes, so he just sticks some battle droids on him and continues on his merry way, breaking into the conference hall.
Again, I have to ask why Maul's got a bunch of Separatist battle droids with him if he's supposed to be eliminating Separatist leadership as well as Republic leadership. This rewrite is really arse backwards, especially with what happens later.
Now, despite his lack of confidence, Anakin's actually quite capable with a lightsaber, but the sheer number of droids is absolutely overwhelming. Or they would be were it not for Owen showing up and helping out with a blaster.
Yeah, I'm sure Owen helped a lot with that measly blaster.
So as Maul manages to cut his way into the conference room, Anakin can make chase after him. And as Maul advances on Padme, Bale, and several other Senators and Separatists, Anakin dives in and locks blades with Maul.
And next comes another stupid change.
The two fight briefly, however, it becomes very apparent that Maul is merely toying with Anakin, taking a moment to hiss at him that were he only to embrace that fear, turn it into anger, and then hate, he could become far more powerful with a lightsaber, punctuating his point by lopping off Anakin's hand.
Yeah, unlike George's version, where Anakin losing his hand was symbolic of him learning as a Jedi through finding out that he's not that powerful the hard way, in this version we get an amputation that serves little to no story purpose. Like, seriously, this amputation does nothing except take Anakin out of action for a little while.
However, at that moment, Obi-Wan runs in. He locks eyes with Maul, and nothing else matters. It is on.
You already know why I don't like this rivalry, and I'm starting to look at how they detract attention away from Anakin Skywalker and his story. Seriously, if prequel haters weren't convinced that his arc was earned, they are going to have such a goddamn fit with your version. Making an Obi-Wan story, contrary to what you think, is a massive mistake, because clearly he is not the overarching protagonist in the original trilogy. I also think that since the story wasn't about Obi-Wan in the prequel trilogy, a rivalry with Darth Maul wasn't necessary whatsoever, which I suppose at the very least, why Maul was done better in the Clone Wars, because as Obi-Wan being a major character for several seasons straight, I suppose he'd need something to do, although I'm not sure Maul was the right choice.
And Anakin gets to see firsthand what a rage-fueled battle looks like, and it's intense.
Also, unlike his TCW counterpart, Maul has absolutely no meaningful resentment or hatred towards Obi-Wan. And I think that's another reason why bringing Maul back in this context is weak as hell. At least in TCW, you could see that he was immediately discarded by his master, driven to insanity, had half of himself cut off from the Force, but here, Maul lacks all of those things. Maul doesn't seem to have a harder time living with robotic legs, he's still the apprentice of his master, and overall, doesn't really have a reason to have such a personal vendetta against Obi-Wan. Not that he has one anyways, because look at how evilly Maul is smiling in this version. Maul doesn't go out of his way to make Obi-Wan suffer, and this whole rivalry just ends up being pointless. Even backtracking George had more sense than this.
It's epic and acrobatic, however, it's cut short by Palpatine and the clone troopers showing up.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this brief sequence is the only time the clones attack anything. Also, why do I feel prequel haters are still going to complain about a lack of personality for the clones?
And in the crazy crossfire of droid senators, separatist clone troopers, Maul manages to escape.
Now he's ran away for the second time in a row, and failed to complete his mission. What an imposing villain, am I right?
Palpatine now gets to gloat a little bit. Were it not for these clone troopers, this diplomacy would have been a massacre.
Wait, so what happens to the Separatists in this version? Were they arrested? They aren't shown on screen again, so I think Belated Media just forgot about them. Thinking about it though, they must have been arrested and became prisoners of war, which seems like a one fell swoop situation, given Dooku now doesn't have his top guys.
Several of the senators suggest that there might be a third party in play, but Palpatine and his generals are like, actually, we're thinking that Dooku and Maul might be linked, as, fun fact, Dooku was a Jedi, but then deserted the Council, and we didn't hear from him until he suddenly resurfaced as the voice of the Separatist movement.
I suppose Maul did show up with Separatist battle droids, but why this didn't raise questions like why in the hell Dooku wanted to eliminate his own leadership, instead of just luring the Republic senators into a trap? Ugh, my brain hurts. I swear, as many irrelevant questions prequel haters tend to ask about things that don't matter, there are so many plot holes in this version.
We're thinking, especially based on his radical beliefs that drove him away from the Jedi, that he fell to the dark side and now used the Separatists and this event as a platform to deliver a real blow to the Republic.
I also have to ask, what's the point of making Dooku an ex-Jedi, or Qui-Gon's former master in this version? It serves literally no relevance whatsoever.
It seems like we're dealing with a serious radical who's an absolute threat. The time for diplomacy's done.
I hate the fact they're making Palpatine a deliberate war hawk who wants as much blood to be spilled as possible. Instead of tricking everyone into thinking he's against the war, but he has to do something about it regardless. And thinking about it, the fact that he doesn't do anything to directly vilify the Jedi whatsoever is something that still doesn't make any sense. Like, I know that in his episode 3 rewrite he has some elaborate bullshit that he comes up with, missing the point of the story, and that Return of the Jedi is literally meant to represent how the Jedi return to destroy evil after evil almost destroyed them. So point is, Palpatine is the one who was for a clone army, an army made up of slave soldiers, and the Jedi were actively opposed to it, instead putting the blame on the Jedi known as Sifo-Dyas. The fact that he was very obviously pro-war when the Jedi weren't, Belated Media's version of the Sith Grand Plan would never result in the formation of an empire. Palpatine's plan to vilify the Jedi and prop himself up as a hero, thus he could eliminate the Jedi without suspicion and declare himself emperor for life without question. Painting the narrative that the Jedi started the war and that he was the one to foil and end it is important because it rationalized his declaration of an empire so that nothing like this would happen again, when really, he was behind the war, and he was blaming the Jedi for it all before establishing a dictatorship with himself at the top of the food chain. Seriously, I could go on forever about the intricate story of the prequels, but let's move on.
Meanwhile, Theed Palace has been converted into a hospital, and Padme finds herself doing her best to take care of the wounded, one of them being Anakin, who she feels absolutely indebted to as he did save her life.
Dude, stop bullshitting around. If you're gonna make them husband and wife, don't make it a falsely dramatic reveal like your episode 3 rewrite that's coming.
Obi-Wan now seeks out the Council of Yoda and says that the tracker has revealed that Dooku's on Geonosis and requests to go after him. And Yoda's like, are you really hoping to find Dooku and answers for what's going on? Or are you hoping that Dooku and Maul are in fact linked and you're hoping to get revenge on Maul? Because one of those answers is very non-Jedi.
What even is the Jedi Code in this version?
And from there we get a larger discussion of the Force and the moral grayness that comes with war, causing many people who were pillars of light to have their judgment clouded by the dark side, and in turn lose their way.
I want to see what dialogue you wrote for this scene, because I guarantee it's going to be as piss poorly written as The Last Jedi's preachy messages against war profiteering, that barely had any relevance to the sequel trilogy as a whole.
Obi-Wan then tells Yoda that he simply hasn't been himself since they landed on Alderaan, and how he's been constantly reliving Qui-Gon's death, and the vision that he saw of the face engulfed in flame.
Again, I hate how they made Obi-Wan caught up with problems instead of Anakin. It's like they're sidestepping the one who actually becomes Darth Vader and destroys everything.
And to that, Yoda's like, okay, change of plans, you are seeking out Dooku. And Obi-Wan's like, wait, what?
Yeah, Yoda's a nut in this version, not having a means of protection. I would have been like that too.
And Yoda's like, well, Dooku trained Qui-Gon, and you haven't fully let go of your master's death. You're still feeling this grief, and it's bottling up inside of you, and it's starting to cloud your judgment.
Wait, so is that the reason Dooku is Qui-Gon's master in this version? That's such a lame way to make it relevant. And it's clear you're just borrowing elements from George's version without thinking about how even one change can screw up the story without care.
And from there, before heading off to Geonosis, Obi-Wan visits Anakin in the sickbay. Anakin, of course, wants to join him, but Obi-Wan says that this is something that he has to do alone, and Anakin should rest up and take care of Padme.
Take care of Padme, of course. Why is this story not subtle in the slightest?
So Obi-Wan lands on Geonosis, and this allows for some fun Flash Gordon action to take place, as he might encounter some large beast guarding Dooku's fortress.
I also love how this is the final battle of the movie. A little boss battle to get to the main guy. Like, seriously, imagine how much LucasArts would be struggling if they were tasked with adapting this absolutely nothing story into a video game for the release window in 2002. Making this the final boss would not be rewarding whatsoever. We'd just get an overly long cutscene afterwards, and then the whole thing would feel anticlimactic. And speaking of which...
And upon vanquishing the beast, Obi-Wan enters the fortress and encounters Dooku.
I love how Dooku has literally no bodyguards aside from that one creature.
And Dooku's like, oh hey, it's super cool that you're a friend, and yes, I did train Qui-Gon, but I've got some shit that I need to tell you that's going to blow your fucking mind.
I also can't imagine Christopher Lee playing this watered down version of Dooku. I just can't. Like, come on. He made the biggest mistake of his life by passing on Tarkin back in the 70s. And he wasn't going to make that mistake again when the prequels were being made. But this is what you had in mind for Dooku? This is a goddamn disgrace.
So Dooku admits to Obi-Wan that he did leave the Jedi Council because he felt himself being seduced by the dark side. However, he took hermitage in the Outer Rim so he could cleanse his mind of these evil thoughts.
Why the hell would he need to take refuge in the Outer Rim? Shouldn't he have just talked to Yoda or whoever about it? See, this is why not making Dooku Palpatine's new apprentice was a mistake.
And right about the time he started to feel like his old Jedi self, that's when Sidious came a-calling. And Sidious was like, hey guy, I'm a Sith Lord, and as a Sith, I'm kind of just amassing power and trying to get everybody on my side so I can crush the Jedi.
Also, what's the timing of all this? How long was Dooku meditating? Had he already started the Separatist movement by the time Sidious called him? We have to assume that Sidious contacted him shortly before this movie begins. Otherwise, why in the hell would Dooku wait years to tell someone? And if he's feeling like his old Jedi self again, then where the hell does him being the leader of the Separatist movement come in? I'm so confused. Like, I'm trying to write a story of my own, and I realized right away that the chronology of your story is very important. Because if two events don't line up perfectly in your story's in-universe timeline, it's going to screw over the continuity and consistency. Belated Media barely has either in his rewrite.
And don't tell anyone, but I've also kind of infiltrated and am slowly gaining control in the Senate. But again, like, don't tell anyone.
And why the hell would Sidious tell Dooku this in your version?
And this offered Dooku just the redemption that he needed, as he rejected Sidious's offer. But as a result, Sidious was like, hey, yeah, that's really cool and everything, but Maul, you better go over there and silence him.
Again, where does the Separatist movement fit into this?
And after hearing all of this, Obi-Wan's like, holy shit. And Dooku's like, yeah, that's why I couldn't tell any of the senators, because we don't know how deep this thing goes.
You know, I don't understand why Dooku really just couldn't contact the Jedi directly. Surely he still has ties and stuff, right?
Meanwhile, Padme's Florence Nightingaleing over Anakin a bit. However, any real hopes of romance are interrupted by Palpatine receiving word from a bounty hunter, and it can be this guy if you really want the fan service.
You know, I thought that was Jango Fett when he first showed him on screen when I first saw this video, but then I realized, oh wait, that's Boba Fett. And I have to ask how old Boba Fett's supposed to be in this version. Also, thinking back to Dark Empire, Boba Fett was thought to be a former Imperial Stormtrooper turned bounty hunter, until that was retconned to be a misconception because of Boba being a clone, and clones became Stormtroopers later. I said I couldn't come up with retcons off the top of my head, but I think I may have just found a little plot hole, and I don't know how alternate expanded universe books are meant to fix this up with a clever explanation. I also didn't speak about it much, but the omission of Jango Fett is such a crime against humanity. Not only would Star Wars Bounty Hunter not exist, nor would Jango Fett open seasons. And his whole connection with Boba and the clone army are gone too. The clones do not matter in this version. The fascist symbolism Order 66 red flags, all of that are gone in this rewrite.
That Dooku's on Geonosis, and so naturally he's going to send the clones on an all-scale assault on Dooku's fortress. Because, this is the best way to showcase the might of the Republic, and not simply ignite a powder keg.
And why Anakin doesn't tell Palps that Obi-Wan's on Geonosis is anyone's guess.
Anakin then reveals to Padme that Obi-Wan's on Geonosis, and then Padme's like, well shit, we need to get to Geonosis before the clones do. So the clock's ticking in and Armada's moving, and Owen pilots Anakin and Padme down to Geonosis.
What's the timing of all this exactly?
So they find Obi-Wan and they're like, dude, we gotta go. And Obi-Wan turns to Dooku and is like, you heard them, let's go. And Dooku's like, no. And everyone's like, And he's like, war's happening. Like, we've failed in terms of diplomacy. This is going down no matter what. But if I die here, that's going to send a far greater message than if I were to run.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a good idea whatsoever. The rest of the Separatist leadership is gone. And if you die, then who the hell knows what's going to happen next? Maybe that sneaky Sith Lord is going to take control of the Separatists after you die. And he does. Jesus Christ. Why is this so terribly written?
So with that, the three have to walk back somewhat defeated. Sure, they saved Obi-Wan, but they're not preventing war.
I also have to wonder why Geonosis has no means of defending itself.
And as they board Owen's ship, they get to turn back and see the clone troopers just blowing the shit out of Dooku's place. And again, following the thought that Obi-Wan's our main character, you have to see what this represents. In Episode 1, Obi-Wan loses his master Qui-Gon, who represents the present. In Episode 2, he gets to reconnect with the past a bit, but that then too is taken away from him. So the only thing for him left to lose is the future. In Anakin.
Yeah, the POV being Anakin's and seeing him lose everything, given he's the guy who ends up falling to the dark side, is a much better idea. Again, why the hell is Obi-Wan the main character? I've heard George Lucas talk about it, and the way he explained it, making Anakin the main character and seeing him ultimately fail to rise above evil and be consumed by it makes Luke's story more unpredictable if you're watching it in chronological order. Because if his father fell, who's to say Luke can't fall? And compared to when the originals were the only trilogy, everybody knew that Luke was going to rise above evil, because that's the hero's journey. But by having Anakin fall first, it creates some doubt in Luke not succeeding either. But here, it's Obi-Wan doesn't fall to the dark side, and Luke doesn't fall to the dark side. And by making Anakin a secondary character in a story where he's the overarching character makes no sense. So yeah, shifting attention to Obi-Wan is a bad choice. I love Obi-Wan as much as the next guy, but the story wasn't about him. It wasn't his story. And your rewrite detracts attention away from the important stuff.
But good thing they're great friends, so nothing's gonna happen, right?
That face is so fakely dramatic.
And as they fly off the surface of Geonosis, Padme can't help but remark that they're just surrounded by darkness and they just seem so alone. And as Anakin comforts her, Obi-Wan remarks that it's not all darkness. There are glimmers of hope all around them. There is light. They just have to find it. And that's how we end Episode 2.
And we're opening to a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. And since The Phantom Menace was critically panned in this alternate universe, this version will fail to make money, and George probably won't make enough to justify Episode 3. So he'd just give up there. Seriously, this is the movie. Not only does it sound incredibly boring, but what kind of climax is that? It feels so untraditional to not have some sort of lightsaber fight towards the end. Instead, there only being like one in the middle of the film. And speaking of, this film is probably way too short, to the point that it probably won't even be feature length by the time it gets made. So Belated Media is going to have to release an underbaked film, or add in a bunch of scenes to make it longer. So unironically, this version doesn't work as a film. This guy, on top of having a terrible story, doesn't even have any imaginative spectacle to hold us over. There's a space battle at the beginning, and then more at the middle, and then an anticlimactic ending. And it just sounds like a mess. This shit is going to be laughed out the theater, and George is going to take the blame because he listened to you for the second time in a row. Seriously, this feels even less like a Star Wars saga film than The Last Jedi, and I would have fallen asleep to it because nothing really happens in it. There's no mystery to it, there's no spectacle, the story as it exists is terribly written and is way too short, and overall, I would hate this to be made into a film. Let's pray that this guy never gets the financing for it. So that's how I'm going to sum up this rewrite. It's horrible. I'm now going to talk about Revenge of the Sith next time. And believe me, is that a complete shit show too? I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.